Okay, I'm on. I think we should be okay this evening. The internet's working well at the moment. Hi, Jay and Jeff. Okay. Yes, while we're waiting, I could tell you all that if you're interested, I've been working on a video series with Dantika on Buddhist history. It's, there's a couple of ones finished, and they're up on the channel, and there's a couple more to come. Oh, good. Some people have seen them already. Yeah, we're pretty sure we have a steward now. There's someone who has said that she's coming in early July, which should work out very well because that's about the time the current one wants to leave. No, last week when I tried to do this, I ended up giving the full talk. I didn't realize that it had cut out, and I only found out later. Only the first few minutes actually got up on YouTube.
It's 6 o'clock.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So a second attempt at continuing this series on the Pãramīs with the Pãramī of wisdom. And we tried to do it last week, but the internet was not cooperating. So I'm going to do it again today. Um, the Pãramīs, to uh, recap, the Pãramīs or Paramitas are a set of mental qualities that are uh, conducive to spiritual growth. And one of the important attributes of the Pãramīs is that the Bodhisattva has to perfect all 10 Pãramīs before becoming a Buddha. It's also widely held that whatever Pãramīs you develop in this life will benefit you in future lives. You will then have that Pãramī will be manifested in the future. You can strengthen your Pãramīs or you can diminish them. If you're heedless, if you act in ways contrary to the Pãramīs, you weaken them. If you encourage them and foster them, you make them stronger. So today we're going to do the Pãramī of wisdom, Panya. And we need to, as usual, clarify first exactly what Panya means. It's also been translated as understanding, but wisdom seems to be the standard translation now. It's the mental quality in the most succinct definition. It would be a mental quality of understanding the true nature of reality, understanding things as they actually are. It arises from within, from contemplation. It's related to, but it's different from vidya, knowledge. Knowledge is accumulation of facts, which can be a ground for understanding. We can then have a basis for wisdom to arise, but accumulation of knowledge is not in itself wisdom. And it's also possible to have a degree of wisdom without a strong basis in knowledge, just a natural innate wisdom or understanding. It's related to the quality of yata bhutya nanadasana, which is the knowledge and vision of things as they actually are, which is one of the stages leading to nibbana, which means penetrating the true nature of existent reality. There are different aspects of wisdom, different degrees of wisdom. We could say that there's a common or mundane wisdom, like having common sense, or being skillful in your ordinary activities, having good common sense. That's a type of wisdom. But the wisdom as a Pãramī is something more, something deeper. It's an actual understanding of the nature of the self and the universe. There's a Tibetan teaching that talks about different kinds of wisdom, and one of the most appropriate pairings there is between the wisdom of equality and the discriminating wisdom. And both have their place, they're balanced, both are important. The discriminating wisdom is the wisdom, or particularizing, we might call it, is the wisdom that allows us to understand and see the difference between objects of consciousness. So you understand a thought from an emotion, from a memory, and from a sensation, from a perception, and so on. That you're able to discriminate amongst objects and classify them and be clear about their particular nature. The other side is the equalizing wisdom, is to see those aspects of objects of consciousness which are universal. And this refers particularly to the three characteristics. That is to see the dukkha, or the suffering or imperfection in all phenomena, to see the impermanence or transient nature of all phenomena, and finally to see the emptiness or voidness, lack of self-essence of all phenomena. And this we could probably say is the highest or deepest kind of wisdom, is to see the emptiness of all phenomena, to understand not on a merely intellectual or theoretical level, but to really understand with the heart and mind the emptiness of self and other. This kind of wisdom comes from long practice of that disciplined introspection that we call meditation, from observing the phenomena and the process of knowing and seeing that it's empty both sides. A really good short formula that the Buddha spoke to a Brahmin student, Mogaraja. The context was that Mogaraja asked him, "How can I escape the gaze of the Lord of Death?" And the Buddha said in three terms: be ever mindful, see the world as empty, and abandon thoughts of self. And this is precisely the formula that leads to the unfolding of wisdom. Being mindful, sati, is the exercise of remembering to be present, being wakeful, and then seeing the emptiness of the world, of all phenomena, and abandoning thoughts of self. So that's being mindful. One sees emptiness in both directions. Both the knower and the known are both void, without self-substance, not existing from their own side. And this is the realization of this is the fruit of wisdom. And this kind of wisdom leads out of samsara and makes it possible to escape from the snares of Mara. Existence in samsara is essentially based on delusion, which is the opposite of wisdom. When we substantialize the phenomena and we identify with a substantial self, then we're caught in delusion and we can't see clearly. We don't see through anything if we identify with it, or if we are obsessed with the defilements. Defilements such as desire, fear, ill will, these cloud the mind and obscure the arising of wisdom. Wisdom is the natural outpouring of the unobstructed mind. When the mind is free of defilements, then wisdom can naturally arise. When we look at anything, when we take in anything through the senses or with the contemplated with the mind, if we are identifying with a self, or that means we have some kind of agenda, and it will distort our understanding of what's happening. We're not seeing clearly, but through a distorted vision, a warped lens, as it were. We don't see clearly when we are identifying, when we make it something me or mine, then we cannot understand it, because now we have an invested interest in it. So we're not seeing it clearly, we're seeing it according to our wishes or our fears. So there are also other ways in which wisdom needs to be balanced, and there's at least two that come up in the Pali sources. One is in the formula of the five faculties, the Indriya. Wisdom is paired with faith or saddha. They're considered complementary qualities, wisdom and faith, and they need to be developed in a balanced way. Meaning if one of the pair is strong and the other is weak, then your development will be crooked. It won't proceed properly. So you have to, if you are trying to follow that formula, you will work on whichever side is weaker and bring it up, and then bring them both up together. It's easy to see with faith or saddha how an excess of faith without a basis of wisdom can lead to trouble. People can have faith in all kinds of things, and some of them are good and some of them are nonsense, and some of them are downright wrong or evil. I always think of a good example for the overdevelopment of faith without any basis in wisdom was something that happened around the turn of the century. Some of you may recall this. There was a comet, and there was a religious cult somewhere in the American, I think Arizona, maybe somewhere in the Southwest, that had decided that the comet was actually a spaceship piloted by Jesus. And if they all killed themselves at the moment of the closest approach of the comet, then they would get their souls would rise up to the spaceship and they'd ride with Jesus. And for anybody else looking at that, it just seems like, nonsense. But they had such faith in it that they actually, there was like, I can't remember how many there were. I think there were maybe about 50. They all poisoned themselves and all died at the same time. So they had lots of faith, plenty of faith. There's no question. They had enough faith that they gave their lives in the faithful belief that would get them onto the spaceship. But there's obviously no wisdom there. There's no discernment. They weren't able to look at it and say, oh, this doesn't make sense. So faith needs to be tempered by wisdom. Now, on the other hand, if a person has a development of wisdom, but there's no faith, this is said to lead to the fault of cunning, and it's said to be as difficult to cure as a disease caused by medicine, which is a very good simile. I mean, if you have some powerful medicine that will cure a disease when used in the right dosage and at the right time, but you overuse it or you abuse it, you use it at the wrong time, take too much, then you're going to make yourself very, very ill, and it's going to be hard to cure you. And we've all we've all encountered people like this that are very hard-hearted and cynical and skeptical and very quick to run everything down. They don't want to be caught out in believing anything, which they think is a kind of a weakness. So by believing nothing, they end up knowing nothing and going nowhere. The role of faith or saddha in Buddhist practice is very important. It's not the same as in some other religions. It's not really you wouldn't excuse me, you wouldn't really call it a faith-based religion. Most of the Buddhist teachings, and the essential ones, are accessible to experience and reason. But it does seem to me that there is one place in which we can only proceed by faith for a long time, and that is the Third Noble Truth. The truth that there is an end to suffering, there is an unconditioned. Until that is realized for oneself, it can only be had on faith, because nibbana, or the unconditioned, being outside of conditionality, is outside of reason, and it cannot be proven. It can only be experienced. And this is evident in the distinction the Buddha makes in the formula for the First Noble Truth and the Third Noble Truth. For the First Noble Truth, he says that we should understand it. And if he says we should understand it, he uses the verb pajanati. If we can understand it, that if we are told to understand it, that means we can understand it. And there's really nothing in the First Noble Truth that's not susceptible to direct observation or reasoning. The Third Noble Truth, we're told to penetrate it, patisamvedi, which means to enter into, to experience from the inside. It's not the same verb, so it's not the same kind of understanding. It's not a holding or grasping of with the mind. Nibbana cannot be contained with the mind, but it can be entered into. It is susceptible to direct experience, but direct experience only. It can't be reasoned about or described or proven. So until it is realized, there must be a basis of faith, the saddha. And we temper the saddha with wisdom by developing our understanding by direct observation. So that's one kind of balancing between wisdom and faith. Another different balance is the balance between wisdom and compassion, karuna. These two, wisdom and compassion, are said to be the supreme qualities of a Buddha. They almost define the existence of a Buddha, perfect wisdom and perfect compassion. Compassion here means the earnest intention or aspiration to end the suffering of sentient beings. So we have, for example, the incident when the Buddha, after he'd attained awakening under the Bodhi tree, his first inclination was, now I understand, now I know, and this experience is blissful. If if I was to try and teach this, many would not understand it. This generation is attached to sense pleasures. They won't want to hear my message. It'll only be a weariness and a fixation. Uh, I will just spend my time here and enjoy the bliss of the unconditioned. But then the Brahma Sahampati appeared before him and begged him on bended knee to teach for the benefit of all sentient beings. And he appealed to the Buddha's compassion. He said, there are those who are perishing for lack of hearing the Dhamma. There are in the world those with little dust in their eyes. So the Buddha was moved by compassion. He got up from his seat and he spent the next 45 years diligently wandering and teaching. So in our own lesser sphere, we should, in our lives, in our actions and interactions with other people, we should try and remember this the balance between wisdom and compassion. If one has wisdom and understanding but no compassion, then you can be very cold and cynical, hard-hearted, and kind of aloof, not want to get involved with other people. But if you have compassion with no wisdom, you're endlessly going to be getting in trouble and stirring up trouble for others. Whenever we see a situation where there are beings in suffering, then this should arouse compassion. But then we need to bring wisdom in and examine the situation and ask ourselves first, is there anything useful that I can actually do? Many times there's not, and that doesn't mean you lack compassion. Compassion can be just an internal mental state. And you look at a situation and you see, well, yeah, this person or these people are suffering, but there's nothing I can do. So the wise thing is to do nothing. Whereas the impulse, often born of compassion without wisdom, is to blunder in and interfere. And very often it makes matters worse. But then if you determine, yes, I can help, then you need to further exercise wisdom and try and discern what is the most skillful way to intervene. What can you do? No. So you can probably all think of examples you've seen, in your own lives of, um, well-intentioned meddling that causes more trouble than good. This is a lack of a balance between wisdom and compassion. These are only perfectly developed and perfectly balanced in the mind of a Buddha. So the rest of us, we do the best we can. We should try and remember these principles, try and base our actions on these two equally important principles. the concern for relief of suffering, and the understanding of what is skillful. The opposite of wisdom is delusion. And I think that's a more direct opposite than ignorance. Ignorance is a lack of knowing, a lack of understanding, but the delusion is understanding wrongly or misapprehending. There's a concept called the vipalasas, which is translated as the hallucinations often. It means seeing things according to a deluded vision, and in particular in regard to the three characteristics. So seeing that which is suffering and imperfect, seeing that as perfect and a source of pleasure, seeing that which is impermanent as permanent or stable, and seeing that which is empty and insubstantial as being a real self-existent entity. There's a story in one of the suttas, or parable, or metaphor, that the vipalasas are like decoys put out by hunters to attract deer, and the hunters are waiting in a blind with their bow and arrows, waiting for the deer. They make a fake deer out of straw and twigs and put it in the middle of the field. And other deers come and say, "It must be safe here. There's a deer already here." And they come into the field and they get killed. He says that the fake deer is like the sense impressions, and the hunters are like Mara. You know? So we go to our destruction if we fall for the vipalasas. We develop wisdom by encouraging in ourselves that clear seeing. This the meditative exercise of vipassana is a disciplined way of developing this clear seeing, being present with reality as it actually is. But it's something we should be endeavoring to do all the time, to not allow ourselves to see through distorted lenses, but to try and see clearly what is actual reality. And that's not always easy, because uh, we can be pulled by on the one hand by desire, and on the other hand by fear or loathing. We can be pulled to see things from a skewed angle and not understand them. It's only from a place of equanimity, being calm and collected, and uh, not being invested in outcomes, but just seeing clearly what is present right now and try and understand it in its own nature. Seeing things in their own nature as they actually are, not as we wish them to be, or not as we uh, think they are according to some theory, but as they actually are, and how they are actually experienced in the mind at this moment. Well, that's how wisdom dawns. You're not coloring your experience, but allowing it to manifest directly in the mind. So, with the development of wisdom comes a greater spiritual maturity, comes many benefits. Wisdom is the key of all the benefits. The mind becomes more peaceful. We become less fearful. We generally are calmer. This all comes from wisdom. When we're succumbing to negative emotions of any kind, you can be sure that at that moment there's a lack of wisdom. So I'll uh, I'll stop there. That's a summary of the quality of wisdom, and I'll stay on and answer questions from the chat. And there's already some. Looks like there's some in already. I am sorry, but I am confused. Who is I? What is liberated from reincarnation, individual consciousness, or self? Getting into Buddhism 101 here. There's no, uh, there is no I whatsoever. There's nothing which is reincarnated. There is consciousness arising again to like conditions. Um, as a short answer, it's a very deep question actually. Um, you should probably, if you want to explore this, I there's a article that I wrote on, you can find on the website, um, the soul in Buddhism. If you read that, it has plenty of references to follow up. Hello, Ajahn and Ara River. Oh, Stephanie and Dantika are here. Yeah, hi. Uh, let's see. I want to have faith, but my problem is, how do I know if I have chosen the right path? For example, Theravada, Mahayana recommended for this current age of Dharma decline, Zen, Buddhism, etc. Um, yeah, I think you have to uh, find what works for you, what leads you to a greater peacefulness, greater understanding. Um, what resonates in your heart. I think you really need to commit yourself to one path and follow it, which doesn't mean you have to, you don't, you can still listen to and read other spiritual traditions and benefit from it. But if you're constantly undecided and going from one to the other, then you're not going to make any progress. That's compared to like running around the mountain rather than climbing it. Panya seems a prerequisite to access the unconditioned, but when it arises, does Panya manifest as a falling away of rational conventional mind, or do they coexist? Also, is Panya irrevocable? Um, it's not the same thing as the rational conventional mind, but they can it can be assisted by it. Having a rational or intellectual understanding can be a basis for Panya, but it's not sufficient on its own. It can provide a kind of an aid or an assist, but Panya is deeper. It's the immediate knowing, the actual experience. And is it irrevocable? It's not irrevocable until you have uh, certain experiences. When you enter the path and the stream and have stream entry, then at that moment there's a dawning of wisdom that is not lost. But it's possible to have ordinary wisdom, even to a fairly high degree. But then if you become heedless and foolish, it can fritter away. You can lose it. Could you please elaborate on the difference between soul and spirit? Um, those are not terms that we generally use in Buddhism. Um, so it's not really a question that I can really answer. It's speculating about things that in our system, don't actually exist. The core teaching of the Buddha is emptiness and not self, anatta. So there is actually no soul as such, which is not. It's important to distinguish that that does not mean that Buddhism is a materialist philosophy, or there is a recognition of a spiritual dimension to life, but it's not personalized. So we can't really relate in Buddhism to the concept of a soul. Spirit as if it just means a spiritual level or a transcendent level to reality, then that's more consistent. But generally, those are not terms that you'll find used in Buddhist discourse. Okay, I think it looks like we maybe the questions may be petering out. I'll wait a minute more to see if anybody else comes up with anything. Also, I'll take my leave. Thank the dewas of the internet that are able to get through the whole session this time. Can arahantship ever be attained without ordaining as a monk? Well, the traditional view on that is that if a layperson attains arahantship, then he or she will either ordain or die within 7 days. Now, I don't think, just speaking, from my own view, I don't think the actual ceremony of ordination is what's critical, but I don't think an arahant could live an ordinary lay life. They wouldn't have any motivation or impulse to have a job or have a relationship or any of that stuff, or have possessions. So it's incompatible with an ordinary lay life. So one would have to become a renunciate of some kind. But the traditional view, because it is based on the various stories in the suttas and commentaries about people who attain arahantship, and if they're a lay person, there are lay people who attain arahantship, but they always either ordain immediately or they die almost immediately. Like in that case, it's like someone attains it on their deathbed. It's not like that arahantship kills them. It's like they're already dying and they become an arahant. When in chanting, there is a reference to the Lord of Death. Is this a real entity or symbolic? What's the difference? Are you a real entity who's asking this question? Or are you a symbolic icon appearing on my computer screen? Lord of Death, Yama, it's one of these mythical or cosmological beings, and to discern whether they're real or not requires a dependence on what your definition of real is. They're real within their own context. Stories about him are kind of interesting, Yama, because he's actually quite reluctant. He doesn't like to do that job. He's sort of his bad karma that he ended up being the bureaucrat in charge of hell. He's not. it's not something he really relishes. Okay, so I think I'll take my leave and thank you all for coming. And we'll do it again next week. And uh, as I said, check out the channel. There are some really fine work done by Dantica on this new series we're doing. You can see a couple of them up already, and there's a couple more to come. What would be the difference? Here's a question. I'll just deal with this last question, then I'll sign off. What would be the difference between someone who has wisdom but not enough faith and someone who has no faith and no wisdom? Uh, like an atheist, both people can be cynical. Well, if they have wisdom without faith, then they'll the type of wisdom would be like a book knowledge and this kind of critical thinking, skeptical thinking approach. Where if they don't have wisdom or faith, then they're just kind of uninterested and dull and ignorant. Not concerned about anything. Just sort of like a dumb beast. Okay, I'll leave it at that, and thank you all, and see you again in a week's time.